Fitchburg is a medium-sized city here in central Massachusetts. About 40,000 people call it home. It's not that old, it's not that new, but still, we have quite a history. The land here, the river here, the people who live here is what makes Fitchburg what it is. These things have changed over the years, and that's affected what we have become now. There's questions we can ask about why Fitchburg is what it is today. Why aren't we more agricultural? Or why don't we have a stronger retail economy like surrounding communities do? Over the course of this series, we'll be taking a look at Fitchburg and what has made it what it is. We'll be peeking in a few corners and looking in a few doors to find out what has made us the community we are today.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
This month we're going to be talking about the history of schools in Fitchburg.
And if you look, you can see Fitchburg, which is pretty much right in the center of the state, and it's to the north.
Fitchburg covers almost 28 miles of land. At one point, schools were scattered throughout the city so that kids could walk to them. Now, we have more centralized buildings where kids are bused in or are driven or drive themselves to schools. We have public, parochial, and private schools here in Fitchburg. We have schools of higher education. We won't be talking about every single school that's ever been in Fitchburg. Instead, we'll be taking a snapshot of a few different years throughout our history. Mostly 1890, 1950, and the schools of today. The schools today, South Street Complex, used to be the Holy Family School. The Head Start School on South Street used to be Hosmer School. Longshore Middle School was once our high school. Some of the other buildings that are no longer schools are being used for other things. The Richardson Road School, an old two-room schoolhouse, is now a Buddhist temple. The schools on Rollstone Road and Laurel Street are used for storage. Some of the schools have been turned into housing. Salem Street School became the Nolan School and it now is condominiums. The Highland Street School seems to be rented apartments. Some of the buildings remain empty. B.F. Brown, a building we call the Annex. The Annex at one point was part of the college. It was a high school. There was a building behind it that was used as a high school when the old high school burnt and before the new high school was completed. But what are the goals of schooling? Basic skills. Now, literacy and college readiness is very important. But who goes to school? Everyone in the early grades goes to school. At one point, there was a high rate of people leaving school, but some adults would come back to learn languages or different skills. But the schools and the education have a rich history in our area.
Public education was founded here, with Horace Mann, and it was very clear to, I think, the founders of, this country and this Commonwealth that, the best population was going to be an educated population.
Horace Mann was a renowned 19th century educator. His name remains famous today. There are Horace Mann charter schools. In Fitchburg, in 1845, he was a co-runner of a 10-day teaching institute. Over 150 teachers from the area attended. This was at a time when teachers had very little education past what their students had. In some ways, the goals of education have not changed over these centuries.
That you have to have an organized approach to provide education for all people. And I think that's the one thing that, public education has been committed to, is really, wave after wave after wave of immigrants have come here, and either through public education or through alternative educations that have been set up by the immigrants themselves, we've been able to provide a well-educated population.
As immigrants began to arrive, language and culture became an issue. Immigrants needed to assimilate. They needed to speak well enough to hold a job. Fitchburg ran evening schools for mill workers. In those schools, they would learn languages, perhaps citizenship, and even skills to carry them through their day. But the attendance in these schools were poor. Officials blamed it on fatigue in the annual reports. Catholic education began in the 1880s. By 1950, almost half the kids in town were educated free in the Catholic schools. There was St. Bernard's for the Irish kids, St. John's in West Fitchburg, Started with 200 kids and 4 nuns. Later, that school was called Sacred Heart. There was St. Joe's and St. Francis. They served a lot of the French population. St. Anthony's started in 1950. That was for the Italian kids who lived in their neighborhood. In the olden days, kids used to walk to school. There were 20 schools listed for 1950. One of the smallest ones was Mount Elam. It had 10 kids. Several of the schools were ungraded. Most were named after the streets they were located on. Others had neighborhood names. But until recently, finishing high school, was not important for many people.
Even when I went to school, education was not mandated, and it was pretty much optional. And, we use a term today, dropout prevention and dropouts. Well, to think that somebody is dropping out means that there must be something, that there's an expectation that they're a part of. So that if you drop out of it, you're no longer on what is considered, the only track. 50 years ago, there was no sense of a term of dropout because it was more people making a choice to either pursue education or pursue another way to provide for the family, because the goal was always to provide a standard of living, provide for the family.
The 1929 St. Bernard's Yearbook had this quote at the end of their photo section. "We wish to say to those boys and girls who started with us early in our high school career, but who were unable to continue, that they have not been forgotten, but will always be remembered as our companions in our younger days at St. Bernard's High School." Things have changed.
If you were not succeeding at that in an academic setting, you could leave the academic setting and go into a work setting and be able to find a job that would develop a particular skill, whether it be a skill with figures or numbers or management, or a skill with hand skills, and you would be able to provide for your family with that. That no longer is the case. I come from a background where most of my family worked in the mills, and they made a very good living at that. There was a social network, there was a support network through that. If you could not or decided not to pursue education, you had a viable way to provide for yourself and your family. Today, that's no longer the case. First of all, most of those jobs no longer exist. So now, the equivalent in terms of an immigrant or a young person trying to get an education, the level of education they need to receive in order to compete now not only with the next town over or the next state, but in a global market, and the level of education that they need for technical experience so that they can be working at a level that's going to require a lot more than a hands-on approach, requires a lot more education, which is why we've now ramped up public education to not only the expectation that you make it through 4 years and don't get Fs. Now with MCAS and standardized testing, which is in every state now, for us it's called the MCAS test, students have to pass a math MCAS test in sophomore year, in English, and now a science MCAS test. And they have to pass it at a certain level in order to receive a diploma. So whereas 4 years of report cards with Ds would have been enough to get a diploma years ago, that's no longer the case. You have to do well not only academically on your local formative testing, but you have to be able to perform at a state test level.
Fitchburg has stepped up to the plate to serve families in the area.
So it's really changed the game to a very high-stakes game. And as you could well imagine, not every student comes prepared academically or socially or mentally, for that level of rigor. And unlike 40 years ago, there is no option for them any longer. In Fitchburg, they have a phenomenal alternative. And this program began before I came, but I come from 2 other districts where I had been part of developing an alternative high school opportunity. In one of the districts, after I was there for about a year, I noticed that at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a number of cars would show up at the high school and pickup trucks. And I thought, who are these people? And after going out into the parking lot and talking to some of them, I realized they were the dropouts. These were the kids who had not done well in the traditional high school, and they were no longer attending, but they were still connected socially to their peers who were in high school. And it dawned on me quickly that some of them had dropped out repeatedly. And the reason that they dropped out repeatedly was that you could go out to the parking lot and get them to come back, but you were inviting them back into the exact same situation at which they had failed previously.
40% of the students at this high school are from out of town.
The success rate is, almost 100%. And it really is an opportunity, and I think it really goes to the heart of what education is supposed to be.
Teacher education has grown right along with the increased need for an educated workforce. From its roots as the Fitchburg Normal School, Fitchburg State has become a university. Students come from all around the country and from other countries to Fitchburg to learn. Fitchburg State was not always the only higher education in town. The Burbank Nursing School existed independently before merging with the college. A teacher's college was run by the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary in what is now the central office for the public school system. Novitiates were taught there. Unlike in 1950, Catholic and private schools do not educate almost half of the kids. The responsibility of education is firmly back on the public schools.
What public education continues to do is really, I think, has the widest door at the front of its school and has the most open arms, really having to or wanting to embrace every child that comes into this country, either through birth or through immigration, with the idea that whatever we do now in integrating our young people, educating them, integrating them into, social life, civil life, civic responsibility, we all benefit from that down the road.
Schools have always faced challenges not of their own making. The 1950 annual report has this conclusion from John E. O'Connor, the man in charge of attendance. The serious threat of another world war and the increased number of mothers who are again entering the industrial plants in an effort to meet the increased cost of living has a tendency to create a spirit of unrest in some of the students due to the lack of parental interest and supervisions. Today, the challenge of educating a reluctant population remains.
When you think about it, the fact that we actually educate the huge groups of adolescents that we do, with the level of success that we have, is kind of miraculous. We take kids at the most tumultuous time of their life, both in terms of hormones, in terms of mental crises, social crises, you name it. And we say, we're going to put you in this very rigorous academic setting for 4 years with very little flexibility. And we still have quite a few kids come out the other end of that, really ready to learn and ready to move on to something better.
Now I know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me? Yay!
Welcome to the live portion of the History of Fitchburg, Schools. Each month, our live show is preceded by an article in the Fitchburg Sentinel and Enterprise on the same subject. The article and the show are meant to complement each other. We'll cover things at the show that maybe we didn't cover in the article. But we're asking for your input too. If you have a question or comment, please give us a call at 978-343-0834, or you can even email us right here in the studio at fitchburghistory@gmail.com. Before I introduce our guest tonight, I have a mystery that maybe you can solve for me. The old high school is built on the same site as the new old high school, or what's now the Longs Joe Middle School. And postcards remain of it, but these postcards are all different colors of buildings. Was the old high school white? Or perhaps it was yellow? We have a few different pictures to show you with this. Or maybe even, was it red brick? It's hard to tell in the postcards, because in the postcards they look all different colors. There's the white one, and there's one you saw at the beginning where it was yellow. So if you have an idea, give us a call at 978-343-0834, or shoot us an email at fitchburghistory@gmail.com. Let me introduce the guests we have here tonight. I'm really honored to have both of these women here tonight. They've both worked extensively in education over the last few decades. Let me introduce first Dr. Shirley Wagner. She's the Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs at Fitchburg State University. Welcome, Shirley. Can you tell us a little bit about your history as an educator?
Sure. I was thinking about my background in terms of education as I was listening to the clip from Andre, and like Andre, I probably went to school in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, and I like to say I've never really left school. I never really decided what I wanted to do, so I just kept going to school, and I intend to do that until I retire. I've been at Fitchburg State since 1977. I have a PhD in political science, and so I was first a professor there and then became an administrator there after about 15 years.
Great, thank you. And our other guest here tonight is Janet Cragen. Janet has been on the front line as a teacher since 1958 and has taught at several different schools in Fitchburg. Could you fill us in, Janet?
Delighted to. Before entering the field of education, I have to say, as the oldest of 6 children, we love playing school. So from going to school to coming home and playing school and having a ready classroom with my 4 sisters and 1 brother, it was delightful. So after I graduated from high school, however, I was sort of theater-oriented, and I opted to go to New York City and attended the American Academy of Dramatic Art. Had a wonderful time in New York, in Manhattan. But after the 2nd year, I realized, well, we better get serious. And so I looked and said, back to school. And I was planning to go out. I got accepted at the University of Utah. Came home to pack up and go to Utah, and my daddy said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, Utah, because I've been accepted at the college there, university." And he said, "No, you're not." And because I lived close to Fitchburg State, I decided to go up the hill. And this was in the end of September, beginning of October. And I heard from a classmate of mine who was ahead of me, graduated, but she was 2 years ahead, that they had this program called Special Ed. And I thought, well, now that sounds interesting and worthwhile and something that I should look into. And sure enough, Dr. William Goldman, who was a pioneer in special ed, was the one who instituted the program there. And what happened was I got involved and became a student teacher at Rentham State School. And then when I graduated and looked for opportunities and put my name everywhere, I was called by Dr. McCann, a superintendent, at the end of August in 1958, would I be willing to take a 1st grade, even though I had the special ed background. But my certificate was elementary and special. They gave a dual license, so to speak. So I was at Richardson Road School.
Okay, and I'm going to interrupt you right there because they flashed some pictures while you were talking of the Richardson Road School as it is now.
Yes.
So I had kind of wanted you to spot that so you could see if that was the room you taught in or not.
Okay.
But I guess we missed that.
Well, that was the Richardson Road School off Ashby State Road.
And there it was.
And there it was, and it continued.
There you go. Was that your classroom?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. It is indeed. Because it did become a number of other facilities until the Crocker School was built.
Okay.
I think 2 or 3 years later,
right,
that when it closed.
Yeah, because that was in the early 60s, I think.
Yes, when they built the Crocker School.
Okay.
So it was delightful because it was a neighborhood school, again, with the children from that neighborhood coming in, and I taught 1st grade.
All right. All right.
So that was fun.
Good for you. One thing I wanted to talk about, since this is personal to me, is the role of women in education. I had an aunt, a great aunt actually, who was in the Fitchburg public school systems, Mary Markham. They ended up naming the Clarendon Street School after her. and I think one of the first female administrators in the town. And I wondered, what could you share with the changing role, or is the role of women changing in education? Shirley?
Well, I think if we go back and we take a look at some of the women who first graduated from the normal school, you'll find out that for a long period of time, when women took jobs in education, they signed contracts that essentially said as soon as they were married, they had to leave the job. Then it got a little more liberal, and they were allowed to stay until they were pregnant, and then they had to leave the job. So I think you get that liberalization of just them being allowed to continue to work in the field at all. Eventually, I think that you get an understanding that some women will be allowed to move forward into administration. That number is probably never as great as it might have been. I would say even today that's a little bit less likely to happen. But I think there has been change over time, and it's more possible. I don't think any of us, it never occurred to me that I couldn't teach at a college and be pregnant. Every semester we have some women who go out on maternity leave at some point during the school year, and we make accommodations for that. So I think there's been a lot of growth in that way.
Great. Janet, how do you see things?
Well, I do see more equality, yes, because the idea that you could have a family life and also teach, and also depending on where you're coming from administration, where you want to go, I think the doors have opened quite a bit, and I think economically speaking, I think there's a level field there. I think it is up to the individual to pursue and look for those opportunities, but I think they're there. They're better than they were, as you mentioning Mary Markham, when you weren't allowed to marry.
Right. Now, when you were pursuing your special ed degree, your teachers, were they males or were they females? Your teachers at college?
Half and half.
Half and
I would
half.
say at Fitchburg. Yes, they were half and half.
And what would be the faculty ratio there now, Shirley? Any idea?
I think that, again, it's pretty much, there's probably a few more women than men in the education department, but I think there's still a combination.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Good.
it is.
In terms of students, though, we'd still have a preponderance of women who would be taking the education courses, whether it's special education, elementary, early childhood, middle school. You might get a few more male students. You might get a few more in the secondary education.
Okay, but still largely female.
You still get a very heavy female population.
Interesting.
Well,
So,
it is.
Yeah.
You look to see again if you're that using the time that you have for the female with the very young, it goes with that elementary. However, there are male teachers in the elementary, and in fact, in the pre-primary that I was teaching after the first grade at Richardson Road School, I looked to have a male teacher come in, because it was important at that age that the children have that kind of contact with the males in the elementary.
absolutely.
And then one of the other school areas that we haven't mentioned, but it's pretty prominent in this area, is there's been a commitment always to technical education or vocational education. And those schools like Monty Tech, you would see more male teachers, and the teachers coming out of Fitchburg State in technical education there would be a larger male population, and it's harder to get females to come into that discipline.
Yeah. I had one photograph, I don't know if we can find it, of an early shot of women in the industrial arts.
Yep.
And they're all standing there looking at the planers.
Yes.
I don't know what they think they're going to do.
Going to B.F. Brown did take the training the industrial arts course, because of course cooking and sewing
Right.
was ridiculous, because
Yeah, she already knew it.
cooked and she sewed. So she took wiring lamps and doing plumbing and fixing little engines and such, but that was my mom.
Okay, and this is my second mystery. I found this postcard, and it said, Faithful Companions of Jesus Convent and High School. There it is. And as far as I knew, the only Catholic high schools in Fitchburg were Holy Family and St. Bernard's. And my clue to you is, when I sent off an email to get some information, the header on the email came back, it was bilingual, French and English. What was this? I was like 3/4 right, I just didn't know the whole thing in my guess. And then I have a follow-up email that goes with that. If anybody would like to give it a try to see if they can tell us who or what that is, why don't you give us a call at 978-343-0834 or send an email to fitchburghistory@gmail.com. And let's see, we have about 4 minutes, so I'll give you a minute or two to count in before I read that other email. So we have a few minutes to talk. Janet, when you went into special education, that was a new program at Fitchburg.
Yes, there were 10 of us in the class.
Yeah, actually probably throughout the state and throughout education in general. Is there a new program like that?
Well, the newest program at the college right now is probably exercise and sports science. We had physical education, but not as a major that people could take. And as we've become a more geriatric society, what's happening is that we're also a very exercise-heavy society, or there's a tendency for us to put a lot more emphasis on exercise. So that's a burgeoning field, and that's an area that we've gone into in the last 7 or 8 years, and that's a real growth area in terms of majors, but also in terms of potential jobs for the future. So that's one of the growing areas.
Nice.
And then we have the old standbys.
Right. All right, I'm going to read this comment that I got after the Fitchburg Sentinel, and this is going to give away the second mystery, what that was. It troubled me to see that there was no mention of St. Joseph's School. I was enrolled at St. Joseph's in first grade in September of 1937, and at the time there were over 1,400 children in both schools.
Wow.
The boys' school on the corner of Columbus and Woodlands, and the girls' school on Woodland next to the rectory. It was probably the largest school in the area at the time, yet I did not read any mention of it. You mentioned the other schools. Please mention that one too. That convent was the convent for St. Joseph's. And when I got the email back from the sisters in Canada, they told me that they had a high school there for girls until about 1925. And I never knew that.
Oh, my.
So that was the mystery on that.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for coming here tonight. It was really wonderful. And thank everyone at home for joining us. And please know that a lot of people put in a lot of hard work to make this program come to you. And so all you volunteers, thank you. It wouldn't have happened without you. Next month, we'll be talking about the history of medical care in Fitchburg. If you have stories to share, please send an email to fitchburghistory@gmail.com. Thank you.
School days over.